Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod with Sandy Khaund. He's a Web3 entrepreneur and a tech investor, founder and CEO at Credenza, formerly founded and led, should I say, Upgraded Inc., which was acquired by Ticketmaster in 2018. Technical guy, I should say. He's in SF. It's not his first startup. He founded a bunch before that, worked at Microsoft, BCG, Intel, Lockheed Martin, so the big companies and huge companies in the US. And yeah, we're going to talk about Web3 today. We're going to talk about Sandy, what he's up to, and everything in between. This pod is brought to you by podpar.com. That's my podcasting company. If you want to start or scale your podcast, go to podpar.com. Sandy, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself, Credenza, and what you're up to nowadays.
Sure. I am an engineer by trade, undergrad and grad in electrical engineering. I've taken a detour in business, so I got my MBA somewhere in there. As you mentioned, I've worked at a number of Fortune 500 companies. That's been great. But at my heart, I am an entrepreneur. The first company I ever started when I was when I was 8 or 9 years old, writing games for my friends on a TRS-80 computer back in the early 80s. I've come a long way since then, but I still love to create software, go out and sell it. And over the last 9 years, my focus area has been, or 8 or 9 years, my focus area has been the blockchain. Sort of before it was cool and sort of the crypto run up of 2017, for the crypto spring and the NFT boom of 21. I've been old school blockchain. It's been a pleasure to be in this industry.
So the industry, I mean, there's a bunch of cool folks that they're 20% of my clients, but there's still like a bit of a scam aura over the full industry. How do you deal with that nowadays?
Yeah, it's a little bit challenging. From a U.S. perspective, I was thinking about this the other day when the U.S. government created the Affordable Care Act. When you called it Obamacare, everybody hated it because they were very mad at Barack Obama. But when you called it the Affordable Care Act, it's like, oh, that's a good thing. We want affordable health care. I feel like when you talk about the blockchain and you use the word blockchain, people get very nervous. They get upset. They think about a lot of the things that happened, 2, 3 years ago around sort of the scams of NFTs and all the things that happened. When you talk about the use cases and the way that blockchain can be beneficial without bringing up the blockchain, people recognize, oh, you can do that. I didn't think it was possible. Then that's a healthier way to have the conversation. So in a lot of our conversations, even as I talk to you as a blockchain entrepreneur, and I'm proud of it, when I talk to customers, I try to focus on customer value, and somewhere in there, I reveal, oh, by the way, this is made possible through a decentralized store that uses cryptographic keys for identification, also known as a blockchain.
I want to start with your first, the first experience that got my attention, Pixo. So you were COO there. That was a pretty big companies back then. I think they even preceded Facebook and MySpace, if I'm not wrong. So what did you learn from your time there?
Yeah, so it was around the same time that there was the rise of the social networks. I think Facebook was founded in 2004. I want to say Pixo was founded in 2004, 2005. Both of them came right after MySpace, and MySpace, of course, came after Friendster was sort of the original social network. What was interesting at the time for us is we saw it as a niche, the opportunity to look after the teen market because Facebook was targeted after college and sort of post-college. And we saw this window of children aged 13 to 17 that wanted opportunities for self-expression, which really was a big part of social networking, right? Being able to present yourself in a meaningful way and connect to other people who are presenting themselves. So on the one hand, it was very exciting, and you saw this amazing growth, and it was an audience that advertisers wanted to get to, right? They are now the millennials that are 30 somethings, but back when I was at the company, they were 18 or 19 years old, and their biggest interests were Hannah Montana and High School Musical. I always like to joke that with Pixo, Pixo was a company targeted at teen girls. I didn't understand teen girls when I was a teen boy. I don't understand teen girls now that I have one. Like I don't get it, but at the same time, you saw the opportunity and you saw the importance of the market and the ability to deliver some interesting products for them online.
And you founded this quite impactful education company right after. Uh, yeah, it was called, I believe, Ironsoft. You
That's
did
right.
that for 3 years. Fast company, most innovative companies in education featured you. So that one, I guess, was your first, yeah, real and serious founder experience. What did you achieve there? What did you learn from that one?
Yeah. I had one previous experience, but I think to your point, it wasn't a serious one. I made so many mistakes at the first one that it's almost like the one I don't want to remember, or that band that has the album they make when they're kids and then they eventually become, Nirvana and they create Nevermind. And I think with Ironsoft, I've never worked harder at a company than Ironsoft. The reason it was called Ironsoft is that my kids' names at the time were Iris and Robin. Iris was my eldest, Robin was my youngest, so it was a hybrid of their name. And the idea was it was founded in about 2008, 2009, around that time frame. The App Store had just opened up. The idea of creating apps as a way of extending the functionality of an iPhone, which now we take for granted, was brand new. And I saw the iPhone as a potential education device. The idea that I had been in distance learning classes, they were on my laptop or they were on my desktop at home. The connectivity wasn't great, it was inconvenient, I couldn't just pull it out. And the idea of using a phone as a way to be able to watch lectures, collaborate with classmates, take notes. We had built this entire platform around it. And for us, we saw it as the future of education. And I've never worked as hard at any company or any job as I did at Ironsoft. I was obsessed with it. I spent 3 years. Every fiber of my being was focused on this. But part of the challenge was my original premise was I thought that adults would want to use their iPhones, their iOS phones to take college classes. What I ultimately realized is that, and they would do it for their own benefit. What I ultimately realized is that the better opportunity was teens and elementary school kids to use Android tablets to take high school classes that they would get for credit. It was literally a pivot of device, pivot of operating system, pivot of customer, pivot of like we pivoted everything we could because we constantly learn more and more about what we did wrong. And as an entrepreneur, you have to adapt to the market. You have to recognize that your original hypothesis is rarely the right hypothesis, right? Now, Facebook wasn't Facebook as we know it today back in 2004, or Amazon started with books and it made sense, but they always saw something bigger. For us, we recognize, you know what, there isn't enough of a market to generate revenue when you're trying to sell to adults about learning. Unless you do something like a master class where you get these major celebrities or things like that. But to get educational lectures, it wasn't going to work. How do we move it to audiences that benefit from it? And in fact, the one other pivot was we went from wealthy adults to kids in inner cities or kids in countries where technology wasn't as prevalent, that we could create for, at the time, it was $200, a tablet, an Android tablet that could have all this information. We created a learning experience. So it didn't work out. And yet at the same time, everything that I learned by all the mistakes that I made or all the changes I had to perform at that company made my future successes in entrepreneurship possible. Sometimes the best lesson you can get isn't from business school, it's from life, it's from experiences, and it's from making mistakes and getting back up.
And then you founded Upgraded, which was quite innovative at the time, 2016, using blockchain technology to prevent fraud and concert tickets, for example, or any tickets for any events. What did you learn from that one, and how did the exit slash validation felt?
Yeah, it's funny because even now, a lot of people come to me with the idea of blockchain ticketing because it's been done and I did it, and yet at the same time, it hasn't reached critical mass the way I think maybe I imagined it would when I started it 8, 9 years ago, and people are still trying to do it. And I say that because there's a humility in what I created and recognizing that while I had what on paper seems a successful exit, there are still unrequited sort of aspirations that I had for the company that never came through. when I came up with the idea of the company in 2015, so it was at the end of 2015 that I really started getting challenges was I was doing it on the Bitcoin blockchain, and things were very limited to be able to do it on the Bitcoin blockchain. I was fortunate that Ethereum hit the Homestead release in about February of that year. I researched Ethereum, I learned it, I played around with it, and I realized this is it. This is what's going to change ticketing. This is what's going to change programming. This is where my love affair with blockchain really began. But I had to learn the technology from the scratch. I had to be courageous enough to leave all the work that throwing it all out. I'm taking a bet on this new technology. And the good news is that I was right. I was vindicated from it being a better technical solution, it creating new capabilities on what the product could be. Kind of like what I learned at Ironsoft, which is I had an idea that it was just about preventing fraud, but I also recognized the market was more interested in how do we, with the honest ticket holders, how do we create more revenue opportunities? How do we prevent certain things from happening with those tickets that are happening that aren't even fraud-like, but we'd like to put restrictions because the resale market is a little frustrating to people. And if we get the people who bought the ticket to use the ticket, that's really what we want. So the fact that we could put these capabilities, these rules on the tickets, that we could establish entitlements so that with your ticket, you can get a concert t-shirt and you can pre-purchase it, or you can pre-purchase alcohol or, food or anything of that nature. The idea of getting money in the door earlier was more conducive to what the companies want, whether it's a musical artist, whether it's a team, whether it's a ticketing company. And so what I thought was, on behalf of the fan, I want to remove the fraud, because we've all had a situation where we've been ripped off or nearly been ripped off because someone's sold us a fake ticket. But also there's a business incentive that says that if we solve the fraud, what else can we do with this technology that promotes the overall goals of the company? Because still, ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to generate more revenue. So that was really the path that we went down. It was learning from Ironsoft that it's like, I have to be open, I have to pivot, I have to listen to my customer constantly and understand what is there. It's one of the lessons that I learned in business school, right? It was a professor of mine, Ian McMillan, one of my favorite professors, and he always said, figure out who writes the check and figure out how to make that person happiest. And from our perspective, we realized it was the fan that writes the check, but actually in the ticketing world, it's the client, it's the team, it's the artist, it's the venue that writes the check. What are they most interested in? How do you formulate the technology in the way so that the person that writes the check recognizes, I can't live without you. You are creating a solution for me that is invaluable to what I'm trying to already achieve as my ultimate business goals.
Love that. So after that exit, you did a couple of projects, MakerDAO, the pandemic hit also during that time. And you became also a general partner at MindSpring Capital. So tell me about, MindSpring, the investments and your thesis of your portfolio nowadays, and also proceed to Credenza and like nowadays, what's Credenza about?
Yes. So MindSpring Capital, which I love, we don't do as much investing as we used to, but we still kind of seek out investments when the opportunity is there. The thesis around MindSpring was founded by a gentleman named Craig Thompson. Craig Thompson is best known as being the founder of the Champions League, if you're a football fan, or he was also the president of the America's Cup, the sailing race. So he had done both of those things. He had a prominent career in sports, just a great friend and a great mentor to me. He had started MindSpring Capital about a year or two before I had actually joined, with the premise that sports technology was going to revolutionize sports. These up and coming technologies, when applied to sport, was going to generate untold amounts of revenue. But he also, because of his unique experience, because he had worked on these global events, because he had spent a good part of his career in Europe, even though he's originally US based, he realized that there was a global angle that was really important. So the partners for MindSpring were everywhere from Sweden and Switzerland and Israel and Germany and Japan. And for me, the opportunity to work with Craig and each of these other amazing people, as well as my lack of knowledge of global sports, as I like to joke, I always called it soccer. I learned you shouldn't call it soccer, it's football. But to understand those sorts of things and recognize that the barriers, the physical barriers that we've always treated about sports is going away, because it's not only gone to television, but it's gone to streaming. So now I have a lot of close friends who are EPL fans because, watching a game, even though it's at awkward times, that is the greatest football in the world. If you ask most people, why should the fact that we are an ocean away in the US from England keep us from watching those games? And by the same token, the NFL and the NBA are trying to push the game in other countries as well. Like, how do we do that? So MindSpring was trying to be at this nexus of sports, technology, and globalization. And that's kind of what we look for. What are the kinds of things, not necessarily on the field to make the athletes better, but off the field, how do you make more viable business by thinking through monetization opportunities, to think about optimization opportunities? And that's where a lot of our companies are. They are around optimization and social media. We have a company around artificial intelligence. There's narrative storytelling. There's betting and wagering. So thinking about all those things, how do we cover the gamut of where sports is going to be and how technology is going to impact these monetization opportunities? So that's been the Credenza run. It's been fantastic. My colleagues are absolutely tremendous, and I learn from them every day as much as our portfolio, which is a fantastic set of about 8 or 9 companies that have all been very exciting to work with because they're led by fantastic entrepreneurs. That said, as being an investor, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. So I can invest all I want, and that's enjoyable because I like working with entrepreneurs. But the only thing I like more than working with entrepreneurs is being an entrepreneur. And that's why I started Credenza in the fall of 2021 is when I started to really coalesce the idea. And to understand a little bit of the background of Credenza, in 2021, we had the crypto spring. Decentralized finance became a very real thing. I was working with MakerDAO at the time. They dreamed of $1 billion under management in 5 years, and it took 5 months just because things move so fast. People recognize value. And of course, there was the whole NFT boom. The problem with the NFT boom, in my mind, and the reason why I never got excited about NFTs, is that I thought they were inherently flawed. They were static. You had to be the same picture. And I'm like, these are digital. Assets should be dynamic. They didn't have a utility. Owning it was only bragging rights. There wasn't much more you could really do with most of the NFTs that were being sold. I thought they needed to have utility. The business model was limited to buying and selling the asset, as opposed to how do you extend the monetization of that asset to make it more valuable? And then they weren't programmable the way they should. These are digital assets that are built on smart contracts. How do you make it so that people can extend the functionality of these things? How do you create these as live assets as opposed to as baseball trading cards or things of that nature? And that was really where Credenza was born. The idea of taking the blockchain, and as you mentioned earlier, the blockchain, which has been associated with scam, whether it's the NFTs or whether it's the old days with sex trafficking or Silk Road or things like that, and say, no, there's a lot of utility here when you use it as a development platform, when you use it as a monetization platform, when you create these dynamic assets, when you rethink what these smart contracts can look like. So our innovations are to say, yes, there is an NFT contract and we can use that. Yes, there is a token contract, an ERC20 cryptocurrency contract, and we can use that. But there are additional contracts that can be domain specific that work in sports that align with the way sports usually makes money. Sports usually makes their money from ticketing, sponsorship, concession, merchandise, content, and betting, where betting is properly authorized. The NFTs weren't tapping into any of that. How do we kind of draw in ticketing? How do we create connecting ticketing and sponsorship in a world where you have a data commons? You have this idea of Web3 as this decentralized platform where the ticketer and the sponsor and the concessionaire and the merchant can all operate with the same sort of decentralized store to have the information on behalf of that team, and more importantly, on behalf of that fan who has a universal ID that cuts across each of these things, because that universal ID is aligned with their blockchain wallet or those blockchain keys. We're trying to reinvent how sports looks at blockchain, but it starts by not talking about the blockchain. It starts talking about those things that customers care about. How do I increase ticket sales? How do I create more sponsorship inventory? How do I push more merchandise? How do I get people to buy more concessions when they're at the game? How do I get people to bet more so that there's more interest in the game, and all those other things rise as a result? how do I monetize content because the content rights are expensive. That's what Credenza is about, and that's what we've been focused on for the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think that fan interaction is underexploited. For example, I went to the Enrique Iglesias show a week ago and bought the full VIP thing, and I think we got a poster and a mug and Ricky Martin bracelet and a Pitbull glass or something, because it was like the trilogy. And I mean, like, why not monetize interactions with these folks and so forth and deepen the relationship there? I think that, yeah, the way tickets are bought and sold is kind of archaic as well. I mean, now they have the app, but even that is not optimal. There could be so much more, like the event itself. If we attended that event, that's like fixed in time, and that's like value, right? It's like attending Nirvana's live acoustic concert. If you were there, I mean, that's
Right.
huge value. So what are your goals this year? What are you aiming for?
We ultimately, it's always about, I always say that the three things that every entrepreneur needs to concern himself with more than anything else, besides, the proper operation of the company, is product, revenue, and capital, right? Like, so I want my product to be the best it can be. And there's certain things that we've already done in the last 2 months that I'm just beyond excited about in terms of making Web3 easier for fans to engage with, making Web3 easier for our partners and our customers to onboard and integrate into their system. So from a product perspective, it's a constant grind to be able to make it easier and easier, make it more powerful, make it access things. So that product goal is always going to be there, and it's always kind of like it's chasing something that's always in front of us, and that's good because we constantly have to make things better and better. From a revenue perspective, the goal will always be cash flow positive, right? We operate at a loss right now. How do we get revenue to the point that we are a viable business, and any capital that we decide to take isn't survival capital, it's growth capital. It's capital to basically level up. I think that goes hand in hand with the other thing that we're thinking about with product, which is we are in sports. We think we have a very good solution for sports. But how do we expand outside of sports so that ability to get the cash flow positive is that much easier? So our product has been built so that it can expand outside of sports into retail, into hospitality. We've got a very interesting client that is working on medical vouchers that basically can be purchased in the US and applied in Africa so that the diaspora can pay for medical services for relatives that may be in countries that aren't as well off, right? So that expansion allows for the product to be able to lend itself to the revenue model. And obviously we're constantly refining our revenue model. And then ultimately we will probably have to raise money sometime this year, because I don't know if we'll get the cash flow positive soon enough to negate the need for revenue, but we are getting closer. We've already had a bigger first quarter than our first 2 years combined. So it's good to see sort of the traction, both in number of customers, in revenue dollars. So I'm very optimistic about the future, but as I always like to say as an entrepreneur, life is full of cautious optimism. You're optimistic, but you're constantly worried about what's around that corner or what might take you out, because it's a survival game every day of the week.
And where can people find out more about you, Sandy?
They can, as me personally, obviously I'm on LinkedIn, Sandy Khaund, Khaund. And then as far as the company, Credenza3.com, Credenza, the number 3.com. And also we are at MindSpring Capital if you're interested in knowing more about our portfolio and the companies that we've invested in.